Chapter 1. The Birthday Ambush. The ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers and polished marble floors, each surface reflecting the extravagant opulence of the Stafford family. Waiters in crisp black uniforms floated between tables, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The air buzzed with murmurs of wealth, power, and admiration. At the center of it all stood Dominic Navarro, dressed in a tailored midnight blue suit, his dark hair slicked back neatly, his expression calm but faintly amused by the spectacle. He hated attention, but he smiled for Bianca. "Happy birthday, darling," Bianca whispered, kissing his cheek as she handed him a crystal flute of champagne. Her voice was sweet, her lips warm, but her eyes were elsewhere. Distant, calculating. Dominic didn't miss it. "40 looks good on you," she added, louder now, drawing a round of polite applause from the gathering. Dozens of industry titans, politicians, and media faces had gathered in the ornate hall of Stafford Manor. The party wasn't just a birthday celebration. It was a public display of power, the kind Bianca and her father, Gilbert Stafford, relished. Dominic raised his glass. "Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. It means a lot to me." "Speech," someone shouted from the crowd. He gave a nod, stepping forward toward the stage. A large screen behind him displayed a slideshow of photos. Family vacations, charity galas, business milestones. His life reduced to curated moments. Bianca joined him on stage, wrapping her hand around his arm, her diamond bracelet catching the spotlight. Just as Dominic opened his mouth to speak, Bianca pulled away. "Actually," she said brightly, taking the microphone from his hand, "before Dominic says anything, I have a little something for him." The crowd chuckled, expecting a playful surprise. Gilbert, lounging with a scotch in hand at the front table, smirked like a man who already knew the punchline. Dominic glanced sideways. Bianca's smile didn't reach her eyes. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a manila envelope, and held it up like a trophy. "Happy birthday, Dom," she said sweetly. "You're getting exactly what you deserve." He took the envelope slowly, aware now that the air had shifted. The music had dimmed. The guests were watching. Whispers began to rise as he opened it, unfolded the pages inside, and read. "Divorce papers. Filed. Signed. Dated 2 weeks ago." A silence blanketed the room, stunned and awkward. No one knew whether to laugh or gasp. Dominic blinked once. Bianca leaned into the microphone. "We're done, loser." Gasps rippled through the guests like a wave. Dominic didn't react. His hands didn't shake. He simply stared at the papers, reading every word as if they were written in another language. His expression unreadable. But in his chest, something old and molten began to stir. Bianca stepped aside, making room on the stage for a tall, smug man in a gray pinstripe suit. Preston Winters, her ex-lover, Dominic's former subordinate. Preston walked up as if he owned the air around him. Gilbert stood now, walking to the front of the stage with deliberate ease. He took the mic from his daughter and patted Preston on the back. "I'd like to take this moment to congratulate Preston," Gilbert announced, voice rich and commanding. "He's officially stepping into the role Dominic held at Stafford Holdings, effective immediately." The crowd froze. Dominic finally looked up. He said nothing. Gilbert continued, as if he were introducing a new model of luxury car. "This young man's vision, drive, and loyalty represent the future of our company. A fresh start, a new generation." Preston smiled, flashing white teeth. "Thanks, Gil. I won't let you down." "You've already let someone down," came a mutter from the crowd, but it was quickly swallowed by silence. Bianca smiled as if it were all a game. She took Dominic's untouched champagne from the podium and sipped it. "You can pack your trash and get out. Tonight. The board's already been notified." Dominic looked at her for a long, cold second. Then his eyes moved to Gilbert. Then Preston. No emotion, no anger, just calculation. A kind of calm that made people nervous, even if they didn't know why. Gilbert looked bored. "Clean out your desk tomorrow." With that, the three turned their backs to him. The crowd didn't know whether to clap or leave. The silence dragged like a corpse across marble. No one dared meet Dominic's eyes. Only one voice broke the stillness, a weak, uncertain, "Dominic, are you okay?" He didn't answer. He didn't move. Bianca's laughter echoed as she descended the stage with Gilbert and Preston on either side of her, her designer heels clicking against the stairs like gunshots. "You should have seen your face," she said to Preston. "God, that was satisfying." Preston chuckled. "Told you he'd go out quiet." Gilbert added, "Should have known from the beginning." Too soft to last. They walked toward the exit, laughing. Dominic stood alone under the bright stage lights, papers in hand, surrounded by silence, judgment, and thin pity. But no one noticed the way his jaw clenched. No one noticed how still his hands were, how unnaturally still. No one saw the way his eyes, dark and hollow, locked on the exit doors as if burning a brand into the backs of the three who had just gutted him in front of the world. He didn't follow them. He didn't move. He just stood there, watching. And behind his stillness, something ancient and ruthless awakened. Chapter 2. 3 days later, the calm before the storm. Bianca hadn't slept in over 48 hours. Her manicured fingers trembled as she tapped her phone screen, again and again, her voice cracking through yet another voicemail. "Dominic, please call me back. I don't know what's happening, but this can't be you. Just call me. Call me." She ended the call and looked at the screen. Call attempt 98. All to the same man she thought she'd crushed under her heel just 3 days ago. The same man who hadn't said a word when she destroyed him in front of 200 people. She sat alone in the living room of the penthouse. Once, it was a space of opulence and control. Now it was a tomb. The flat-screen TV displayed a silent news anchor mouthing the words "Federal Investigation, Stafford Holdings under scrutiny." Across the scrolling ticker, Preston Winters detained for questioning. Bianca buried her face in her hands. "What the hell did you do, Dominic?" 72 hours earlier, Dominic had vanished. No one saw him leave the party. No one knew where he went. His apartment was untouched. His company devices were wiped. Surveillance systems failed to track his car after it exited the estate. To the world, Dominic had simply dissolved. But Dominic Navarro wasn't running. He was reassembling. Beneath the streets of downtown Manhattan, far from the city's glass towers and trading floors, a steel door hissed open. Fluorescent lights flickered to life as Dominic stepped into a private operations room. On the walls, screens lit up with live financial data, satellite feeds, and encrypted comms channels. His team was already there, silent, efficient, deadly. Ezra, former NSA, now Dominic's chief tech strategist. Alina, ex-Mossad infiltrator, eyes sharp and voice sharper. Victor and Dennis, logistics and extraction, and when needed, wet work. Dominic removed his blazer and unfastened the top button of his shirt. "Phase 1, he said simply. Ezra nodded. "Already in motion. We've pulled back doors on Preston's old brokerage firm. He's been embezzling Stafford shares for years. Fraudulent disclosures to the SEC," Alina added. "We've linked 8 accounts. Offshore under strawmen. Evidence is strong enough to freeze them by morning." Dominic said nothing. Just watched the lines of code scroll across the screen. Ezra continued. "You sure you want to hit them this hard right away?" Dominic turned, voice calm as water. They chose the battlefield. Meanwhile, Bianca stared at her frozen bank app in disbelief. "Insufficient access," it read. She tried again. Same message. She called her banker. "Mrs. Stafford, I'm sorry, but due to a pending federal investigation, your accounts are under temporary lock." "What investigation?" she snapped. "I can't say, but I suggest speaking with your attorney." She ended the call, stood up too fast, and knocked over a wineglass. Red spilled across the marble like blood. "This isn't happening," she whispered. Then the knock came. Hard. Repetitive. Federal. She opened the door and immediately backed up. FBI jackets. 2 men, 1 woman. "Bianca Stafford?" the lead agent asked. Her voice caught. "Yes. We have a warrant to search the premises for financial records, digital correspondence, and communications between you and Preston Winters." Her mouth went dry. Why? The agent's eyes were clinical. "Stafford Holdings is under investigation. You're a material witness. Please remain inside and do not interfere." They walked in without waiting. Within minutes, her life unraveled. Flash drives seized. Laptops bagged. Personal phone cloned. Her world, once wrapped in diamond and silk, now reduced to property tags and evidence lockers. Dominic watched it all unfold on a split screen. One feed from Bianca's penthouse hallway camera. Another from a news drone circling Stafford Holdings. A third from inside the Midtown Detention Facility where Preston Winters sat pale and sweating in an interrogation room. Victor entered behind him, carrying a file. Winters cracked, he said flatly. Didn't even last 4 hours. He flipped on Gilbert and implicated Bianca in corporate leaks. Dominic didn't smile. He barely blinked. Upload the footage. Encrypt it. Package it for the SEC and press, he said. Victor raised an eyebrow. Public release? Midnight, Dominic replied. Give him something to wake up to. He stood and walked to the far wall of the control room. There, in a locked cabinet, sat a thin manila folder labeled D. Navarro, Op Hollow Ghost. He opened it slowly. Inside, a death certificate dated 15 years prior. His own. Dominic Navarro, listed as killed in action during a covert NATO operation in Eastern Europe. Body unrecoverable. Status classified. Entire file signed off by military intelligence and sealed by an executive order. He stared at it for a moment, a flicker of memory behind his eyes. A coal mountain, a helicopter crash, a traitor in the unit, a fire, a silence, and then rebirth. That was the day Dominic stopped existing in the eyes of the world and began crafting the one life that couldn't be manipulated, bought, or owned. Until Bianca. Until now. At 11:43 p.m., in a quiet townhouse outside the city, a burner phone buzzed twice. Bianca snatched it from a nightstand, heart thudding. Unknown number. She hesitated. Answered. Silence. Then a voice low, calm, chillingly steady. You should have asked yourself why I never raised my voice at that party. Her breath hitched. Dominic, you thought silence meant weakness. She blinked tears. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know. The voice didn't waver. You thought you were playing me, but you never once looked at the board. Call ended. Bianca stared at the phone in her shaking hands. Across town, Preston screamed behind interrogation glass as agents pushed more documents in front of him. Gilbert's name. Bianca's signature. Money trails he couldn't explain. Dominic stood in the control room, arms folded, eyes hard. Everything was moving. Not with noise. Not with vengeance. With precision. The calm before the storm had passed. Now came the storm itself. Chapter 3. Ghost in the System. The server room hummed beneath layers of steel and concrete, hidden 37 floors beneath Axiom Capital's false front, a boutique wealth advisory firm with just enough exposure to be credible and just little enough to be invisible. But behind its fake veneer was the command center of a ghost, a place where Dominic Navarro no longer existed as a man, only as a machine. Gilbert's firewalls are pathetic, Ezra muttered, hunched over a multi-monitor rig, fingers flying across the keyboard. Running a billion-dollar conglomerate on back-end systems older than I am. There's more mold in his code than in his soul. Alina leaned over his shoulder, her face unreadable. He doesn't even realize we already slipped in last month. The trackers are live. Dominic stood behind them, silent. He didn't need to ask how much access they had. He designed the plan 3 years ago, in case of betrayal. Now the failsafes were not theory, they were activation keys. Ezra tapped a few keys. One screen split into 12, each showing Stafford Holdings' internal systems. Email servers, trading accounts, payroll flows, audit trails, executive VPNs, live boardroom feeds. Phase 2 initiated, Ezra confirmed. Dennis entered with a tablet, offering it to Dominic. Our dummy shell accounts are set to leak stock option anomalies starting 9 o'clock a.m. tomorrow. All traceable back to Preston's access credentials. We've mimicked his keystroke behavior. Flawless, Victor added. We'll tag it as insider trading for 2 IPOs Gilbert backed through offshore shells. SEC will smell blood. Start the drip, Dominic said softly. No fanfare. No gloating. Just execution. He walked over to the primary operations screen. A holographic projection showed a sprawling, interconnected web of corporations, shell companies, silent partners, and shadow assets, all tied to Stafford Holdings at the center. He stared at it like a man watching a condemned city from above. Gilbert's empire was a gilded skyscraper built on sand, and Dominic was about to send in the tide. At precisely 9:03 a.m. the next morning, Bloomberg released an anonymous leak citing financial irregularities in Stafford Holdings' overseas asset reports. At 9:12 a.m., a Reddit thread began going viral under the r/Wall Street Leaks sub, highlighting forged timestamps on two key Stafford acquisitions, flagged by a so-called ex-employee whistleblower. By 9:31, internal Stafford Holdings Slack channels were buzzing. Staff across departments began noticing restricted access to systems. Gilbert's CFO, Simon Marks, emailed IT. Can someone explain why half the 2019 audit backups are inaccessible and redirecting to dead nodes? They wouldn't get an answer, because there was no one left on the inside who wasn't being watched. Back inside the Axiom war room, Alina lit a cigarette and exhaled toward the vent. Stafford's internal auditor just ran a diagnostic trace on the leaked spreadsheets. They're panicking. Two execs in legal are messaging each other on Signal. Think they're about to jump ship. Let them, Dominic said. We need the rats to chew through the wiring before the floor gives out. Ezra laughed under his breath. Man's playing 5D chess with a flamethrower. On one screen, security cam footage showed Gilbert shouting into a phone in his glass-wall boardroom. His face was red. He slammed a folder down. Preston, handcuffed just 2 nights ago and freshly released on bail, stood across from him, visibly sweating. Dominic turned to Alina. Patch me in. She nodded, clicked a few lines of code. A hidden mic inside the room, planted a year ago in a decorative pin on the conference table, came to life. Gilbert's voice boomed. I don't care what it takes. Clean this up. Call the Cayman Bank. Have them bury the trail. Preston's voice. Nervous. That won't fix the leaked audit records. If they track it back to us, Gilbert snapped, they won't. You think anyone can outplay me in this city? Dominic's lips curved. Not a smile, a signal. He tapped Victor on the shoulder. Send the email. Victor cued a pre-drafted message from Whistle ID 11. It included fabricated documents, all digitally fingerprinted to look like internal leaks, revealing Gilbert's back-channel dealings with 2 foreign officials, both now under active U.S. sanctions. In under 30 seconds, it hit the inbox of 24 journalists, 3 financial watchdog agencies, and 1 particular senior analyst at the New York Federal. Dominic checked his watch. 2 hours, he said. They all knew what that meant. 2 hours until Stafford Holdings would be swarming with regulators and forensic auditors. In the meantime, chaos bloomed. The Stafford Holdings IT team went in a meltdown. Someone triggered an internal lockdown. But it was too late. The planted code Dominic had slipped in months ago as a backup plan was now waking up. It shredded audit logs, rewrote timestamps, cross-corrupted backup archives that had never even been touched. To anyone looking from the outside, it would appear that Stafford's own people had tried to erase evidence. It would not look like sabotage. It would look like guilt. At 11:47 a.m., Dominic stood at the massive wall of screens, watching a simulation of the Stafford Holdings stock price beginning to tip downward. How about the boardroom's private chat? Ezra said suddenly. Check this out. He pulled up a live feed of messages between board members. 8.56 Director Langley. What's going on? I'm hearing FBI might get involved. 9.10 Director Shaw. Preston's name is all over these filings. I want out. 9.12 Langley. Dominic said nothing at the party. How do we miss this? Alina chuckled. They're trying to count cards while the table burns. Dennis looked to Dominic. What's next? Dominic's eyes never left the screens. We bleed them. He said it without heat, without drama, like a doctor reading a diagnosis. Inevitable. Impersonal. Ezra tilted his head. Bleed them financially? No, Dominic replied. Structurally. Silence. The air thickened. He continued, still calm. We hollow the company from the inside. They lose trust, lose support, lose liquidity. And then the predators come. By noon, Stafford Holdings had lost 8% of its market value. By end of day, their internal systems were in disarray. Emails bounced. Invoices vanished. Regulatory alerts stacked up. The company's trusted facade was collapsing like damp plaster. And yet, no one outside knew where the leak started. No one even whispered the name Dominic Navarro. Because he had become a ghost, not just in identity, but in execution. Where others screamed, he whispered. Where others threatened, he calculated. And as Stafford Holdings began to rot from within, Dominic stood in the center of his control room, watching, waiting, silent. Chapter 4. The Lover's Reward. Preston Winters had always moved through life like the world owed him something. He had charm without depth, confidence without substance, and a smirk that could get him a drink, a promotion, or a mistress. But that morning, the smirk was gone. He stood barefoot in a silk shirt and wrinkled slacks on the tarmac of a small private airstrip outside Newark. Sweat soaked the collar of his shirt. He glanced nervously over his shoulder at the jet waiting for him, sleek, quiet, paid for by one of Gilbert's hidden slush funds. Inside was a duffel bag full of burner phones, 5 passports, and 3 forged IDs. He was 10 feet from freedom. Then came the sirens. He spun around just in time to see 4 black SUVs barrel through the gates, tires screeching, lights flashing. No, 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 Preston muttered, bolting for the stairs to the jet. He didn't make it. 2 agents tackled him to the ground, wrenching his arms behind his back as he thrashed and screamed. Preston Winters, you're under arrest for securities fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. What the hell is this? I want my lawyer. This is illegal. I didn't do anything. One of the agents shoved a tablet in his face. On screen, wire transfers, flagged emails, and a photo of Preston accepting a suitcase full of cash in a Monaco casino. Anonymous tip. No source. No origin. Just irrefutable. As they dragged him toward the SUV, Preston caught a flash of light, a drone hovering silently above the airstrip, red recording light blinking. Watching. Broadcasting. Meanwhile, Bianca sat in the center of the marble-floored lounge in Gilbert's Long Island mansion, still in her silk robe, her phone shaking in her hand. Arrested? He was arrested? She whispered to herself, staring at the breaking news alert. The headline was brutal. Stafford Holdings COO Preston Winters detained in attempted escape. Charges include bribery and money laundering. Her mouth went dry. The room spun slightly. Her father was in the city, dodging press like a hunted animal. His firm's stock had dropped 16% in a single day. Board members were threatening to defect. Their flagship project had been suspended pending investigation. And now this. Preston, her golden ticket, her leverage, her secret lover, gone. She laughed once, short, bitter, then threw the phone across the room. It cracked against the fireplace and shattered. Damn you, Dominic, she muttered. As if summoned by his name, the estate attorney arrived minutes later, flanked by 2 assistants. Bianca barely looked at them. Tell me this is being handled, she snapped, brushing her hair from her face. The attorney adjusted his glasses nervously. Ma'am, I'm afraid we have an issue. What now? He held out a folder. Inside, her prenuptial agreement. She barely glanced at it. I already know what it says. I've seen it 100 times. He hesitated. Actually, you haven't. Bianca's eyes narrowed. This isn't the version I signed. No, he said, swallowing. It was quietly amended 2 years ago. By mutual counsel. Approved by both parties. Signed. Bianca flipped through the document. Her eyes scanned the highlighted clause, heart thudding harder with every word. Clause 14C. In the event of proven infidelity by spouse B, all marital asset claims are forfeit, and spouse B shall retain only property held in her name prior to marriage. Spouse B, Bianca Stafford. Her jaw dropped. This isn't real. I never signed this. Digital signature and verification log confirm it, the lawyer said, almost apologetically. Initials match. IP trace shows your login. No, I didn't, she stammered, flipping faster now, finding more traps. Stock holdings? Gone. Joint properties? Gone. Vehicles, jewelry, travel assets, all filtered through Dominic's trusts. Her accounts had been locked days ago. Now she understood why. Her voice shook with fury. He set me up. He planned this. Before I even cheated. The lawyer remained still. Bianca stood, throwing the folder across the room. He knew. That son of a bitch knew I'd cheat. She began pacing, panic rolling over her like crashing waves. Where is he? Where the hell is Dominic? No one answered. No one had an answer, because Dominic wasn't anywhere. And everywhere. An hour later, a butler approached quietly, nervously. Miss Stafford, he said, there's a situation. She turned to him, mascara smudged, robe now wrinkled. What now? There's a court order, he said, gently placing a white envelope on the counter. Effective immediately, you are no longer permitted residence at this address. She snatched the envelope and tore it open. Her eyes skimmed the first few lines. Eviction notice. The house wasn't in her name. It never had been. Gilbert had placed it in a company trust decades ago, and Dominic had quietly bought out that trust last year. She froze. This is my home. The butler didn't respond. Instead, 3 estate staff members entered, silent as shadows, already collecting her personal bags and boxes into a pile by the front entrance. No, you don't understand. I belong here, Bianca whispered. Then louder. Get your hands off my things. The butler held out her coat. Bianca slapped it from his hand. You can't do this. I'm his daughter. But the others weren't listening anymore. The front gates opened with a metallic groan. A Blacktown car waited just beyond, engine running. She looked around the grand foyer, the chandeliers, the marble staircase, the paintings she'd handpicked. All of it was slipping away. One of the staff tapped her lightly on the shoulder. It's time, ma'am. She turned to scream, at someone, at anyone, but there was no one left to scream at. Dominic didn't need to shout. He'd done what he always did, quietly, precisely. He'd removed her, like a stain. As the heavy oak doors slammed behind her and the locks clicked into place, Bianca let out a scream, raw, furious, helpless, that echoed down the long, empty driveway. But the gates didn't open again, and no one came to answer. Chapter 5. Stafford Holdings falls. It began on a Monday, 8:03 a.m. sharp, just before markets opened. The security gates of Stafford Holdings' global headquarters in Manhattan groaned open to a sea of dark suits and polished shoes. But these weren't shareholders or clients. They were federal agents. FBI, SEC, IRS, all moving in coordinated silence, like hunters closing in on wounded prey. Within minutes, 20 armed officers flooded the lobby, escorted by 2 teams of forensic auditors carrying sealed briefcases. A federal magistrate stood in the center of the storm, holding a stack of signed warrants. The receptionist stammered, "Can I help? Why?" "We're here for Gilbert Stafford," one agent said flatly. "This building is now under federal investigation." Panic spread like spilled gasoline. Executives dropped phones. Assistants scrambled to shred papers. Legal counsel was on the 29th floor, too late to react before agents seized every server and communication node from IT. Outside, reporters and news crews were already gathering. Inside, the empire began to crack. Gilbert Stafford stormed out of his office 15 minutes later, red-faced and thunderous. "What in God's name is this?" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the lead agent. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," the man replied calmly. "And that's why we're here." He handed Gilbert a packet, 163 pages thick, with exhibits, timelines, and allegations that spanned 2 decades. Gilbert flipped through it, face going pale. Offshore tax evasion, bribery of foreign officials, securities manipulation, falsified quarterly reports, insider trading, embezzlement. Each accusation meticulously backed by digital footprints, bank transfers, whistleblower testimony, and signed board emails. "This is garbage," Gilbert growled. "This is a witch hunt." "Then we'll let the courts decide," the agent said, nodding to his second team. "Seize all personal office devices. Backups too. Don't touch a goddamn thing." Gilbert roared, but no one listened, because it was already too late. At 10:14 a.m., CNBC broke the story. Federal agencies raid Stafford Holdings HQ. Major investigation into 20-year financial crime conspiracy. The news spread like a virus. By 10:40 a.m., Bloomberg, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal were running segments. Each article came with attachments, scanned documents, emails, whistleblower quotes, all anonymously sourced. No one knew where the leaks were coming from. No one realized that Dominic Navarro had written every word. In a secure room beneath Axiom Capital, Dominic sat with Ezra, Alina, Victor, and Dennis. Screens flickered with live news footage, wiretaps, security feeds, and market dashboards. Ezra leaned back, whistling. They're bleeding from every hole. The SEC just froze 3 Stafford subsidiary accounts, Alina added. And the Cayman partners are now denying they ever authorized the real estate trades. They're trying to wipe their hands clean. Victor chuckled. Even the rats are abandoning ship. Dominic didn't speak. He watched silently as the Stafford Holdings stock ticker began to fall, red lines dipping further with each passing minute. Headlines rotated like funeral bells. Stafford CFO resigns midday afternoon. Shareholders demand emergency meeting. Internal emails implicate executives in a legal trading scheme. Do we leak the second wave? Dennis asked. Dominic nodded once. Ezra executed the command. Within seconds, a fresh leak reached over 100 inboxes. Journalists, federal attorneys, state regulators. This one included a voice recording, Gilbert laughing in a 2021 board meeting, bragging about how nobody in the SEC has the balls to audit me. The soundbite was immediate headline gold. By Wednesday, Stafford Holdings had lost 38% of its market value. The boardroom was in full collapse. 4 directors had resigned. 2 others had turned state's witness, hoping to avoid prosecution. Gilbert sat alone in his corner office, blinds closed, whiskey glass shaking in his hand. His phone was dead. His legal team wasn't returning calls. He stared at the television, sound off, but headlines looping mercilessly. Gilbert Stafford, America's fallen tycoon. FBI seizes more Stafford assets. AS new evidence surfaces his legacy. His name was now a punchline. He reached for a bottle of scotch, then slammed it back down. Bastards. All of them. He turned to the camera crew already waiting in the boardroom for a previously scheduled live interview with CNBC. They had begged him to cancel. He refused. Let them see the real me, he muttered. He didn't realize how true that would become. At exactly 3:00 p.m., CNBC cut to a live feed. The anchor introduced Gilbert Stafford as a man under fire, facing the fight of his life. The screen split. On one side, the anchor. On the other, Gilbert. Gilbert's face was gaunt. He hadn't shaved. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. The anchor began gently. Mr. Stafford, are the allegations true? No, Gilbert snapped. They're lies. Fabrications. Planted evidence. Do you know how much good I've done for this economy? The anchor blinked. Sir, we've seen internal documents. I don't care what you've seen. Gilbert roared, slamming his palm against the desk. This is a witch hunt orchestrated by someone. Someone out there who wants to see me fall. And I'll find them. His voice cracked. Then something in him broke. Live. On air. For millions to see. He began rambling. Incoherent accusations. Swearing. Sweat dripping down his face. He tore off his microphone. Knocked over a water glass. And finally stumbled off camera, cursing under his breath. The screen went black. The anchor looked horrified. Back in Axiom's bunker, Victor leaned toward the screen. That's it. That's the moment. Public collapse. Alina nodded. He'll never recover. Dominic remained still. A whisper of emotion flickered behind his eyes. Not joy, not pride, just quiet confirmation. This wasn't revenge for him. It was consequence. The following morning, 1,000 headlines painted Gilbert as the face of American corruption. Stafford Holdings board issued a statement. We are cooperating fully. Mr. Stafford is being placed on indefinite leave pending the outcome of federal investigations. Translation. He's done. One by one, the pillars of the empire crumbled. Stocks, partners, trust, legacy. and not a soul suspected the quiet, ghost-like man behind it all. Because Dominic Navarro didn't exist. Not officially, not legally, not anymore. But his fingerprints were everywhere, on every email, every leak, every wiretap, every whispered tip. It was a war of patience, of precision. And by week's end, Stafford Holdings, once untouchable, lay in ruins. Chapter 6. The Woman Who Knew Too Late. The walls of Bianca's once luxurious penthouse apartment now felt like a prison. Not metaphorically, literally. 2 federal agents were posted outside the entrance. The living room was half empty, art and antiques seized by the government. Her designer shoes lined the marble floor like hollow trophies. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the ticking of the antique grandfather clock. She sat on the edge of a velvet couch, staring at the door, waiting, hoping, dreading. Then a knock, not from a front, the service entrance. She rose like a ghost, slid across the cold tiles, unlocked the private side door, and opened it slowly. He stood there, coat collar turned up, eyes unreadable. Dominic. She hadn't seen him in nearly a month. He looked different, sharper, colder, not disheveled like a man ruined, but composed like a man in control. "Hi," she whispered. He said nothing, just stepped inside. For a moment, neither spoke. Bianca tried to breathe evenly, but her voice betrayed her as she gestured toward the sofa. "Please, sit. I didn't think you'd come." Dominic sat wordlessly, eyes scanning the room, not in nostalgia, but calculation. "I had to," she continued, twisting her fingers. "They've frozen everything. My cards, my accounts. The car's gone. The house is its next. They say I might face charges for laundering if I don't cooperate." Still silence. Her voice cracked. "Preston's gone. He ran, and I had no idea what he'd done, Dominic. I swear to God. I don't." His voice was flat. Bianca fell, quiet instantly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You knew exactly who Preston was when you invited him back into our lives," Dominic said. "You just didn't care." "That's not true. You lied," he said, still calm. "To yourself. And to me. Because he made you feel something I apparently didn't." Tears welled in her eyes. He didn't flinch. "Do you remember when we lived in that one bedroom in Ridgeway?" she asked softly, voice trembling. "Before the promotions. Before your suits cost more than our rent. When you used to carry 2 part-time jobs and still find time to draw stupid little hearts on my coffee cup." Dominic stared. "I remember everything," he said. "I remember when you laughed at the little things. When you called me your storm shelter. When we built dreams out of ramen noodles and chalkboard lists. I also remember when it changed." Bianca walked to the window. "I never meant to fall out of love," she whispered. "But the world we climbed into. It changed me." He nodded just once. "Power does that." She turned. "But you, what are you now, Dominic? What have you become?" He reached into his coat pocket, took out a phone, tapped once, set on the coffee table, screen facing her. The video began. Preston, shirtless, drunk, laughing into a phone camera. But she's so damn easy. You butter her up, play the wounded ex, act like her knight. Bianca eats that up. Poor girl never even realized Gilbert was dangling the promotion like bait. God, she thinks she chose me. What a joke. Bianca stared in horror. Her knees buckled. She sat down slowly, a hand clutched over her mouth. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. He used me, she whispered. Dominic looked at her, not with hatred but pity. You weren't the only one he played, but you were the only one who betrayed someone who would have died for you. Bianca sobbed now, full-bodied, guilt-laced tears. I thought you were just another pawn in Gilbert's world, she said between gasps. I didn't know who you really were. You never asked, he replied. There was silence again, heavy and full of history. Then Bianca stood up and crossed the room to a cabinet beneath the stairs. She reached into a hidden panel and pulled out a small black box. Inside it was a silver flash drive. My mother gave this to me before she died, she said, walking back to Dominic. Told me to keep it hidden. Said if anything ever felt wrong with the Staffords, with Dad, I should find you. I didn't understand it back then. She held it out. Dominic took it carefully. What's on it? I don't know. I never opened it. He studied it for a moment, then looked up at her. Why now? Because everything I thought I knew was a lie. Because I destroyed the only man who ever loved me, and I have nothing left to lose. He stood, pocketed the drive. For a long moment, he looked at her. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but spiritually. Like the towering woman who once walked red carpets and diamonds now saw herself stripped bare, ashamed. Dominic opened the service door. She called after him softly. Dom, will you ever forgive me? He paused, turned back only slightly. Forgiveness isn't mine to give. It belongs to the version of me you buried the day you handed me those divorce papers. And with that, he walked into the cold night. Bianca collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into silence. Chapter 7. Whitley's Shadow. The flash drive was cold in Dominic's hand as he sat in the dim light of his private command room, the heart of Axiom Capital's underground operations hub. The walls were steel and soundproofed, lined with encrypted terminals, fiber connections, and a war room board with red-threaded photos pinned like a web of silent vengeance. He stared at the drive for a long time before slotting it into a secure terminal. Encrypted, of course. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Layers of protection peeled back like old armor. Custom-coded firewalls, legacy military-level ciphers, not corporate encryption. This wasn't from Gilbert or Preston. This was military intelligence work. When the final lock broke, a single folder appeared. Whitley A. 7. Dominic's breath slowed. He opened it. There were documents, dozens of them, going back decades. Photographs, intercepted memos, surveillance logs, contracts with redacted names, even psychological profiles. But what caught his eye first was a grainy image dated June 12, 1996. His parents, Joseph and Mira Navarro, standing outside their foundation's headquarters, smiling, innocent. The next image was of their car, burnt, twisted metal, emergency responders surrounding it. Beneath it, a scanned report labeled vehicular sabotage. Cause, mechanical breach. Subject, confirmed fatalities. His heart dropped. All these years, Dominic had believed the car crash that killed his parents was an accident, a cruel twist of fate. But this confirmed what the nightmares had hinted at for years. They were murdered. And then another name emerged, one that hadn't crossed Dominic's mind since his Black Ops days. Bradford Whitley. He clicked on a subfolder. Dozens of files exploded onto the screen. Dominic's eyes scanned the first page, a CIA summary marked eyes only. Bradford Whitley, strategic intelligence asset turned rogue operator. Suspected in covert economic warfare activities across South Asia, South America, and Western Europe. Highly networked. Power broker. Shadow-level access to civilian and military finance sectors. Another document detailed his connection to Stafford Holdings, private investments routed through blind shell companies, merger approvals influenced through bribery, covert manipulation of IPOs to crush family-owned rivals. And at the center of it all, Operation Emberglass, coded mission dated 1995. Objective: eliminate the Navarro Foundation before launch of Financial Ethics Initiative. Prevent exposure of illegal private equity funneling to international black markets. Orchestrator: Bradford Whitley. Method: internal sabotage, political framing, clean removal of founders. Dominic's hands gripped the edge of the desk. He remembered now the whispers during his time in military intelligence. Rumors of a man who pulled strings in silence, who didn't just kill people, he erased their legacy, their memory, their very fingerprints from history. Whitley wasn't just a villain. He was a ghost maker. And Dominic, the child left behind from one of his erased families, had been a loose thread he never noticed. Until now, the second revelation hit harder, buried deep in a personal journal entry, presumably written by Bianca's mother, with a line that chilled Dominic's blood. Bradford's idea to push Bianca toward Dominic is clever. Gilbert's cooperation is secured. With Dominic emotionally bound, we can ensure control over his assets once he comes into power. The boy doesn't even know what he really is. He stopped breathing. He read it again and again. Bianca wasn't just someone who'd betrayed him in the present. She was part of a plan to bind him emotionally, legally, strategically to the same family that helped orchestrate his family's destruction. He'd been groomed. From the moment they met, everything had been orchestrated. The chance encounter at University Mixer, the way she latched onto his hunger to prove himself, the way Gilbert offered him a job just weeks after they began dating. He had been played like a violin, tuned for a symphony of ruin. Dominic stood. His breath came slow and even. He didn't rage. He didn't scream. He didn't even cry. Instead, he opened a glass case embedded in the wall. Inside, wrapped in black cloth, was his old military tag, the one listed Kia years ago. He hadn't touched it in over a decade. The name etched into it didn't even exist anymore in public records. But now it mattered. He wrapped it around his palm, letting the cold metal dig into his flesh. Behind him, footsteps echoed. Victor entered, eyes scanning Dominic's face. "You saw it," he said quietly. Dominic nodded once. Victor exhaled. "We suspected for years, but we could never prove it. Not until now." "It's all here," Dominic murmured. "Every piece." "What do we do?" Dominic turned toward the giant board, the one covered in photographs, red strings, news clippings. He walked to the far edge, where there had once been a space left blank. A mystery. A void. He picked up a fresh pen, placed Bradford Whitley's photo there, connected him to every corner of the board, to Gilbert, Bianca, Preston, the Navarro Foundation, even Axiom Capital's early investors, some of whom were sabotaged before Dominic ever launched. Whitley had been hunting him before he even knew who he was. "This wasn't betrayal," Dominic said, voice like stone. "This was war. Started long before I was old enough to fight it." Victor stepped back. "Then it's time we finish it." Dominic's eyes burned with ice. "No," he said. "Not finish it. Unmask it. I want the world to see him, the man who erased my family, my name, my life. I want him exposed before I take everything he ever built." And with that, he walked out of the room, the flash drive still clenched in his hand, not as evidence anymore, but as a weapon. Chapter 8. The Final Hunt. The world never knew the name Bradford Whitley, and that's exactly how he wanted it. Dominic intended to change that, not by revealing him, but by erasing him so completely that even whispers of his power would be forgotten. It began in Montenegro. A shell corporation called Corvex Holdings, registered under 3 layers of falsified ownership, led to a single offshore server cluster. Victor hacked the encrypted ledger in under 36 hours. What they found was a constellation of money laundering routes, silent financial arteries that pulsed with billions, funds that touched arms dealers in West Africa, biotech startups in Shanghai, and real estate ghosts in New York. Every one of these nodes, Dominic said coldly, circling multiple spots on the screen, feeds into the core. Tear them out. I want him exposed. I want him vulnerable. I want him human. The operation was called Nocturne. It spanned 9 countries, 2 continents, and 5 time zones. Alina infiltrated a Geneva-based wealth management firm posing as an auditor from the Swiss Financial Markets Supervisory Authority. Within 2 days, she extracted a full list of internal fund transfers and seized over $400 million in hard assets. Ezra went underground in Bogota, where a false ID tied to Whitley had acquired a network of informants running crypto scams. He flipped the local tech team in one night with a suitcase full of clean passports and one whispered name. Navarro. By week's end, Dennis had tapped into a private surveillance feed in an estate outside Naples. A bald, thin man, Whitley, walked the perimeter every morning at 6:03 a.m. with a cane and an armed bodyguard. "I've got eyes," Dennis reported. "But the place is fortress-grade. Ex-military perimeter, coded gates, RF jammers." Dominic studied the layout. "He thinks he's invisible. Let's show him what it's like to be seen." They struck at dawn. It wasn't a loud breach. It was surgical. Alina lured the guards out with a spoofed emergency alert on their internal comms. False reports of a compound breach. While they scrambled, Dominic and Ezra slipped in through the rear greenhouse using blind spots mapped out from drone footage days earlier. Whitley was in his study, unaware. Dominic stepped through the door like a shadow re-entering the past. Whitley looked up, eyes narrowing. You made it further than I expected, he said, voice like gravel. But you won't pull the trigger. Dominic didn't blink. I'm not here to kill you. Whitley chuckled. Then you're a fool. I'm here, Dominic continued, stepping closer to erase you. The silence that followed was more dangerous than a gunshot. Whitley tilted his head. You've already ruined my systems. I know. I've watched the holes widen for days. But if you think this ends me, Dominic tossed a small tablet onto the desk. The screen lit up with a deep blue interface, Whitley's private vault access. Every file, every ledger, every blackmail asset. We took it all. Whitley's eyes flicked to the tablet, and for a moment, just a moment, the predator inside him vanished. Dominic circled slowly. You build a machine designed to outlive you. Silent investments, strategic corruption. Entire regimes molded in your image. But you made one mistake. Whitley's jaw tightened. Let me guess. You. No, Dominic said. You forgot that ghosts don't stay buried forever. Whitley leaned back. You want a deal? That's why you're here. Power needs power. I can give you access to... Dominic slammed a thick dossier onto the table. Inside were photographs, emails, video recordings, every atrocity, every betrayal, from a murder of the Navarros to the psychological grooming of Bianca. Your legacy ends now. Whitley's voice lost its charm. You can't control history. Dominic's expression didn't change. I don't need to. I'm burning it. The weeks that followed were biblical. Dominic's team didn't just expose Whitley. They deleted him. Every shell company was unraveled and broadcast through whistleblower channels. Leaked documents tied him to war crimes tribunals, corporate sabotage, and collapsed governments. His offshore accounts were frozen, one after another, in rapid succession. Interpol issued a red notice. Anonymous published a dossier titled, The Man Who Never Was, detailing a dark web empire tied to his identity. The internet shredded his aliases, one by one, until there were none left. His Naples estate, seized by Italian authorities on tax evasion grounds. His private servers, wiped clean. Within 14 days, Whitley was a non-entity. But the final blow came at midnight. Dominic uploaded one last file, a keystroke bomb that activated inside every single backup system Whitley had ever created. Every digital asset he'd buried, every contingency, every name vanished. Backdoors sealed, aliases broken. The legacy was gone. Whitley was caught crossing the border into Moldova on a false passport under the name Marcus Drell. No fanfare, no agents, just a border officer and a quiet arrest. They didn't recognize him. He was no longer anyone. Back in Axiom's command center, Dominic watched the footage in silence. Victor stood behind him. He's done. Dominic nodded once. Good. And you? Alina asked, leaning on the wall. You satisfied? He didn't answer at first. His gaze stayed on the screen. Whitley in handcuffs, head low, escorted into a processing facility where no one knew what he'd done or who he'd been. The world would forget. And that was the point. I don't want to be remembered for revenge, Dominic said finally. But I do want to be remembered for finishing what he started. Ezra raised an eyebrow. Finishing? Dominic turned off the monitor. No, he said, correcting. And with that, he walked away, not triumphant, not angry. Just cold. Just finished. Chapter 9. Empty Thrones. The rain fell in slow, steady sheets against the vast glass window of Dominic Navarro's high-rise office. The city below, a sprawling labyrinth of light and steel, glittered faintly beneath the gray sky, indifferent to the man who watched it all from above. Dominic stood alone. The silence of the room was thick, almost suffocating. Outside, the world moved on. But inside, time felt frozen. The empire that had once mocked him, crushed him, tried to erase him, was gone. Gilbert Stafford was in prison, his name now synonymous with corruption and disgrace. The man who had once ruled boardrooms with an iron fist now shuffled down cold, sterile corridors, stripped of power and dignity. Preston Winters, the snake who had slithered into Dominic's life disguised as an ally, was behind bars too, his own empire dissolved and his plans ruined. His laughter, once a weapon against Dominic, was now a distant memory muffled by steel bars. Bianca was isolated, bankrupt, a shadow cast out from the halls of wealth she had once owned. Her assets frozen, her reputation in ruins. She wandered like a ghost in a house that was no longer hers, a queen dethroned. Bradford Whitley, the shadow puppeteer, had vanished from the world. Rumors circulated of his arrest, his exile, or perhaps his death in some foreign land. None mattered anymore. And Dominic? He had won. Everything they had taken from him, his name, his legacy, his dignity, he had reclaimed and multiplied. His firm, Axiom Capital, stood taller and stronger than Stafford Holdings ever had. His financial empire stretched across continents. His influence reached into the deepest veins of global markets. Yet, as he gazed down from his throne of glass and steel, Dominic felt a hollow ache where triumph should have lived. He moved away from the window and toward the sleek, black leather chair behind his massive mahogany desk. He sat down, fingers steepled. His eyes scanned the city, the roads, the people, the countless lives unaware of the war that had just ended above them. He whispered to himself, "Is this victory?" Memories flooded in, not just the triumphs, but the losses, the years of pain, the nights spent haunted by ghosts of a past erased, the warmth of a love that had turned to ice, the faces of those he had lost, his parents, his former self. Dominic's breath hitched. He clenched his fists, as if trying to grasp the fleeting fragments of a life he once had. "Was it worth it?" he murmured. No answer came, only silence. Across the city, life continued unabated. A child laughed on a playground. A woman argued over coffee orders. A man hurried down the street, late for work. The world did not pause to acknowledge the fall of empires or the quiet devastation of one man's soul. And perhaps that was the truest justice. Dominic stood again. He walked over to a cabinet and pulled out an old, worn photograph. It was of him as a boy, smiling, eyes full of hope, alongside his parents in the sunlit garden of their family home. He traced the edges gently. His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry it took so long." He placed the photo down, folded it neatly, and locked it away. The phone on his desk buzzed. He ignored it. Messages from allies, partners, even Bianca's desperate attempts, all left unanswered. Dominic had nothing left to say. He walked back to the window and stared out once more. The city lights flickered like stars trapped in glass. Somewhere a siren wailed. The rain softened to a drizzle. And Dominic Navarro, victorious, powerful, and utterly alone, embraced the silence. Chapter 10. The Man Who Never Died. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet cemetery nestled on the outskirts of the city. Autumn leaves rustled softly, drifting in slow spirals to the ground, their colors a muted flame against the fading light. Dominic Navarro stood before the headstone, weathered, yet dignified, marking the grave of his parents, Joseph and Mira Navarro. For 30 years, he had avoided this place, not out of fear, but because it was a wound too deep to face. Today, he had come to pay his respects, to finally close a chapter he had left open for far too long. He knelt down in front of the stone, his leather shoes stirring fallen leaves. His fingers traced the carved letters slowly, deliberately. A soft breeze carried the faint scent of jasmine from a nearby bush. Dominic closed his eyes, drawing in a breath heavy with memories. "I kept my promise," he began, voice low, steady. "I found those responsible for taking you from me. They paid. All of them." He paused. The weight of decades pressed down, and for the first time, his voice cracked with something close to vulnerability. "But they stole more than your lives." He swallowed hard, looking away briefly. "They stole my chance to be someone else. To grow up as a son, not a ghost. To choose my own path, not one forged in shadows and revenge." A small stone shifted under his knee. Dominic exhaled slowly. He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a worn military dog tag, the one bearing his assumed death. He held it up to the sky, the last rays of sunlight catching the metal. "This," he whispered, "was never who I was meant to be." The wind picked up, rustling the branches above. He stood and looked around, taking in the silence that stretched between the tombstones, the quiet dignity of the place. For a moment, he let himself imagine what could have been. A life without war, without loss, a family dinner filled with laughter instead of secrets, a future not overshadowed by ghosts. But the moment passed. Dominic turned away from the graves and began walking slowly down the gravel path. His footsteps crunched softly on the stones. Ahead, a young couple passed, their hands entwined. He watched them briefly, then whispered to himself, "I had to become the man who never died, so others could live." The cemetery gate loomed ahead, its wrought iron bars casting long shadows. Dominic hesitated there, one hand resting on the cold metal. He pulled out his phone, then closed his eyes and slipped it back into his pocket. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. Not today. As he stepped out onto the quiet street, the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky. He glanced back once more toward the cemetery. A faint smile touched his lips. The boy who vanished 30 years ago would never return. But the man who remained, precise, silent, and relentless, had carved a new legacy. In his mind, the words echoed again, carrying the weight of a life lived in shadows and light. Dominic Navarro died long ago. He paused, breathing in the cool night air. What's left is justice. With that, he disappeared into the night, a figure shaped by pain, forged in loss, and driven by a purpose that was far from over. Chapter 11. The Girl in the Coffee Shop. The morning fog curled lazily over the small town's main street, softening the edges of brick buildings and shop windows. It was the kind of town where everyone knew your name, or at least thought they did. But Dominic Navarro no longer answered to that name. Not here. He walked down the quiet sidewalk with a purposeful, measured step, his dark coat pulled tight against the chill. His face was unfamiliar, features softened and shadowed under a worn cap. The weight of years, victories and scars alike, clung to him like a second skin. His destination was a modest coffee shop, a place where the scent of roasted beans mixed with fresh bread and morning chatter. It wasn't the city. It wasn't the boardrooms or the bright lights. It was something quieter, something simpler. Dominic pushed open the door, and a small bell chimed softly. Inside, the shop was warm, with sunlight filtering through lace curtains. A handful of regulars sat at tables, their conversations low and unhurried. The barista, a young woman with a cascade of dark hair and sharp eyes, glanced up briefly, offering a polite smile before returning to steaming milk. Dominic took a seat at the corner table, the one with a cracked leather chair and a view of the street. He pulled out a small, battered notebook, flipping it open to a blank page. As he waited, he noticed her. She was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine with slow, deliberate movements. Quiet, observant. There was something in the way she moved, a calm precision that felt familiar. Like she knew how to disappear without being noticed, but chose not to. Their eyes met briefly across the room. A flicker of recognition, or maybe curiosity. Dominic's fingers tightened on the notebook. The barista approached, her voice soft but clear. "Coffee." He nodded. "Black. No sugar." She smiled, a hint of something unreadable. "Coming right up." As she prepared the drink, Dominic watched her. There was a steadiness there, a quiet strength beneath the gentle exterior. When she placed the cup before him, their eyes met again. "I'm Lila," she said, extending a hand. "Dom," he replied, shaking it firmly. Lila lingered for a moment, then glanced toward the notebook. "Writer?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes. It depends on the story." She tilted her head, intrigued. "What kind of stories?" "Stories about people who lost everything, and what they did to get it back." Lila smiled softly. "Sounds like a tough story." Dominic looked out the window, watching the fog lift from the rooftops. Tough stories don't always end the way you want. Lila leaned on the counter. Maybe they don't, but sometimes they lead to something new. Their conversation hung in the air, unspoken but charged. Over the next few days, Dominic found reasons to return to the coffee shop. Each visit was quiet, simple, a moment of normalcy he hadn't allowed himself in years. Lila listened without pressing, her presence a steady anchor. One afternoon, as rain tapped lightly on the window panes, she slid a book across the table. "It's a collection of poems," she said. "My grandmother wrote them. She believed words could heal." Dominic accepted it, fingers brushing hers briefly. He opened the book and read the first poem aloud, his voice low and steady. "In the quiet, we find the broken pieces, and with each dawn, they start to shine." He looked up at her. "Maybe that's what I'm searching for." Lila nodded. "Maybe you're ready." But beneath the calm, Dominic's mind remained alert. Shadows lingered at the edges of his thoughts, old enemies, unfinished battles, and the weight of a past that refused to die. He knew peace was fragile. A single misstep could shatter it. One evening, as the shop closed and twilight settled, Lila asked quietly, "Do you ever miss the life you left behind?" Dominic paused, the question hanging between them like a whispered secret. "I miss the person I was before it all began," he admitted. "And the man you became?" He smiled faintly. "He's still here, just quieter." Lila reached across the table, her hand covering his. "For whatever comes next, you don't have to face it alone." Dominic stared out at the darkening street. The lights flickered on, casting long shadows. He squeezed her hand, a promise without words. Then he whispered, barely audible, "This isn't the end." Outside, the fog began to creep back in, swallowing the edges of the town. Inside, the warmth of the coffee shop held strong. And in the quiet, two lives poised on the edge of new beginnings or perhaps new wars.